Welcome, and thank you for standing by. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode until the question and answer session of today's conference. At that time, if you wish to ask a question, you may do so by pressing star 1. This conference is also being recorded. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. Now I will turn the conference over to Joyce Rose. Thank you. Please begin.
Thank you, and welcome to the Child Welfare Information Technology Systems Managers and Staff webinar series brought to you on behalf of the Health and Human Services Administration for Children and Families Children's Bureau and presented by ICF International. I am Joyce Rose, your host and moderator for today's webinar, which is the MiSACWIS Experience from Waterfall to Agile Development and the Promotion of a Healthy SACWIS. Due to changes in funding availability and priorities, the opportunities for in-person discussions and networking amongst professionals working on child welfare IT systems are limited. As an alternative, the Division of State Systems within the Children's Bureau continues to provide a series of webinars supporting information sharing and discussion. The content of the webinars is structured so as to appeal to state and tribal welfare staff participating in an agency's child welfare IT initiatives. As I mentioned previously, today's webinar is entitled The MiSACWIS Experience from Waterfall to Agile Development and the Promotion of a Healthy SACWIS. It is our belief that the information presented in today's webinar is a natural sequence to last month's webinar, which discussed the cultural impacts of moving to Agile. Today you will learn how Michigan has not only implemented the Agile principles in their SACWIS project, but also integrated their Enterprise Project Management Office into the process. The future webinars are, in February, the ups and downs of interagency data sharing to benefit children in foster care, examples from the field, from the Departments of Education and Health. And in March, we are going to do Bridging the Partner Gap, best practices in working with the courts. The next webinar in April will be demystifying the Capability Maturity Model Integration, CMMI, and improving organizational performance and quality. And then in May, we will be talking about managing today's electronic workforce. So attendees are encouraged to participate in our webinar with questions and comments. All of the participant lines are muted now, but we will open them for the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. However, please be aware that you can submit questions at any time using the GoToWebinar chat feature, and those will also be addressed during the Q&A session. Should we run out of time, we will respond to your questions via email, and/or should you have additional questions, you may submit those to me at the email address listed on the slide, joyce@kassets.com. So we are always very interested in knowing who is attending our seminars, our webinars. It is our intent throughout all of the webinars to make the content applicable and attractive for everyone participating in an agency's CWIS efforts. Now, we ask that you self-select one of the 5 categories listed, and my colleague, Elizabeth, will conduct the poll. Elizabeth?
Yes, so there is a poll open in front of you. If you could just click on the appropriate choice and let us know who's participating today. I'll give you all about a minute to choose. We have a good-sized audience today, so we're particularly interested in knowing who is joining us. We have about 80% who have cast their votes, so if the rest of you could just jump in there, tell us who you are. If there's a bunch of you in a room together, just pick the title that represents the majority. Okay, we have about 90% of you having identified yourself, so I'm going to go ahead and close. And it looks like today we have 29% state child welfare information system project managers, just over half, 54% state child welfare information system program policy or technical staff. We have 2% tribal child welfare system program policy or technical staff, and 15% ACF or Children's Bureau personnel or ACF contractors.
That's an excellent mix of disciplines, as certainly this topic will cut across each and every one of you. So let's move now to our webinar format. Certainly the format is a brief introduction of the participants, followed by approximately a 60-minute presentation by our guest presenters. Then we will end with an attendee Q&A session, followed by a short wrap-up. Now, as we learn about the MiSACWIS experience, please be aware that the concepts and lessons learned are applicable to and can benefit all child welfare system development and IT initiatives, not just a SACWIS. So let's introduce our presenters. Next slide, Elizabeth. Unfortunately, Mr. Steve Yeager, who is the Director of the Children's Services Administration, will not be able to present today. He is actually called away on a different assignment, and we certainly do understand that. Jim Hogan is the manager for the State of Michigan Department of Technology Management and Budget, where he has been an information officer since its formation in 2002. In this role, he has directed IT support for Michigan's education, business, and human services agencies, and has directed the development of a number of key projects that have been recognized with 10 #1 Best Practice Awards from the National Association of State Chief Information Officers, or NASIO. Lori Johnson has been the MiSACWIS project director since 2009 and has over 20 years of child welfare experience, managing numerous child welfare systems projects, including Children's Protective Services, juvenile justice, and foster care program areas. Lori's received a Best of Michigan Government Technology Award for Best IT Collaboration for the design and implementation of the current new birth match process. Lori has presented nationally on best practice SACWIS solutions, the new birth match process for the Department of Health and Human Services and the Center for Disease Control, and the National Child Abuse Neglect Data Conference on Child Welfare Data Warehouse Reporting. Dwayne Kirkstraw is the Development Manager for the State of Michigan Adult and Children's Services Program, which includes MiSACWIS maintenance and operations. Dwayne has 30 years in team leadership, including IT business ownership, application teams, and hardware-software services. Dwayne is an Agile certified Scrum Master and has added an ITIL Foundation certification to his resume, certainly making him the perfect leader for the MiSACWIS implementation, followed by the transition to Agile principles for the program's maintenance and operations. And Cole Jacobson is currently a Senior Project Manager for the MiSACWIS project. Cole has 31 years of professional experience in project management for the Office of Child Support, Eligibility, and Child Welfare, and has both the PMP and Agile Scrum Master certification. So with that introduction, I would like to invite the State of Michigan to commence their presentation, and I will now turn it over to Lori Johnson.
Thank you, Joyce, and thank you all participants. Michigan MiSACWIS, as it's called, is very happy and honored to present to our federal participants and other states on our journey. We'd first like to kind of go over what we thought our webinar objectives would be today, and it is to provide a Michigan strategy, promote quality and productivity in our SACWIS while incorporating new enterprise approaches to development and governance. We'd like to reiterate the importance of sponsorship, governance, and project management. We'd like for folks to take away the IT enterprise solutions that are currently active in embracing Agile in the state of Michigan. We'd also like to donate our business value of moving to Agile, understand productivity levels in MiSACWIS, how using Agile has been instrumental. We also would like to talk a little bit about our future structure of MiSACWIS program and some key insights and lessons learned from our transition to Agile. Next.
Good afternoon, Jim Hogan. Just by way of background, in the state of Michigan, we have essentially 20 unique state agencies providing services to business and citizens. But all IT has been consolidated into one organization in Michigan. So we have what's called the Department of Technology Management and Budget, and we provide IT services to all state agencies, and that gives us the ability to stand up what we call enterprise solutions. So rather than building something 20 times, we build it once and can tell folks to use it. So in that capacity, it gave us a lot of visibility into project development and some of the shortcomings of the traditional waterfall approach. And so those of you who are familiar with the waterfall approach, generally we'll get a lot of folks together in a room, and we'll go through what we call joint application design sessions. And then people will take notes, and then we turn that over to the programmers. So the business analysts, our customers who have given us this requirement, they're not in touch with the programmers for 6 to 8 weeks. So they think that these requirements have gone into this big black hole, and they're kind of wondering, what's next? And then what often happens, not only in the Michigan MiSACWIS project, but in other large development projects, is our customer will sit down and start going through what we call user acceptance testing. And then all of a sudden they'll say, whoa, wait a minute. This isn't what I thought I was getting. And then you have the inevitable finger pointing between the technologists and the business side, et cetera. And so, again, this isn't localized to just the Michigan MiSACWIS project. It's true across all large IT projects, and I suspect many of the listeners on the phone have been through this. So one of the things that we did was we took a step back and said, okay, how can we improve this? And within Michigan, we had this burgeoning culture, if you will, around Agile. So we had, across our department, different pockets of development teams that were exploring the Agile process. And so we thought collectively it might be a good idea to start using this Agile process as we started maintaining and making enhancements to the broader MiSACWIS system. And one of the things that really helped us there was, in Michigan, we had made this investment in IBM's collaborative lifestyle product tool set. So we had the software products at our disposal. And before we embraced using those software tools, we decided, let's get the teams together and at least start the Agile process, getting collective teams together, doing sprints, et cetera. And so what I hope you guys learn in the next 50 minutes or so is how we've done. But at a high level, that's kind of where we were corporately, always did the waterfall approach, and then decided, let's try something different, and that's what got us to the Agile, and we're real excited to tell our story. And so you'll hear a variety of speakers in the next 50 minutes or so telling that story. You'll hear a variety of speakers in the next 50 minutes telling that story. Next slide.
The next slide should be Foundations for MiSACWIS and Agility. Sorry, we have some technical difficulties here. We lost our screen. Sorry.
Is your screen back now?
Yes, it is.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay, and is this where we need to be?
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Sure.
And thank you. And Jim Hogan is part of the governance structure, and really what's to lay the foundation for all of what MiSACWIS has become and where we've started. So, true to any kind of business relationship of lessons learned is looking at the governance structure, looking at the sponsorship, and there were two critical areas in which Michigan has focused on. And one is the joint partnership with our ACF and the State Child Welfare Agency and DTMB. And the other is the relationship between what is acknowledged by Jim Hogan's presence and his executive leadership for the state, but also our state, our leadership with our department. So recognizing that, how critical that is through the beginning of time, meaning before we even evolved into post-go-live, we had that precedence and that trust building into the Agile process. So a little bit, I just wanted to touch base on how important this leadership is in a microcosm. And really, Cole will talk more about the education of our project management and the installation of that project management and the evolution of that. And then it kind of dovetails into the marrying very much of the project management office and how important that is to changing over into an Agile environment. Next. Working in a successful Agile environment to the business means monthly releases. Prior to this go live, we were working in constant in that Waterfall business area. So we had 8 parallel tracks all across the business and IT. And as Jim indicated, they were kind of working in silos until April 30th go live. Post go live, we recognized the challenges of everything going into a go live activities, and then the business and kind of colliding on the day's event through our help desk, stabilizing the system, and so forth. What Agile is, incorporating Agile within the first 2 months or an Agile strategy allowed a lot of flexibility and a lot of quality within the application. And we're going to talk about those successes on. What the business relied upon very much within the project management structure and the governance and the leadership, and that continuity of leadership throughout even the build all the way to the implementation and post-go live. Very successfully, that governance led us through this to determine that Agile was the approach to go to. What has that done? Speed to delivery. So we stabilized the application within the first couple months of go live. And then how do you receive all the asks, if you will, or the field engagement? I would like this. I would like this. Different forums saying this isn't working for me, this needs to be redesigned, and so forth. And those are the types of things that have been very successful in the Agile approach through our governance. We've been able to create large forums in the field community and engage them very quickly based on reviewing our help desk data, doing quarterly site visits, and really determining how the SACWIS is interacting with their daily job. It was not if we were going to change MiSACWIS, because we will always have an augmentation, a modification, so policy or otherwise within the system. It is how we do it. And Agile lends itself to that very cooperative business IT relationship, sitting right across from each other, but very hard to manage in a post-go live immediately following a Waterfall delivery. We were able to, current successes, within the first 90 days, we redesigned our centralized intake. Centralized intake to a SACWIS is our gateway to all child welfare going into the system. We were able to do a mobile SACWIS solution, and we are actually delivering February 3rd the second mobile phase SACWIS solution via our engagement with the field, understanding that, dropping it into our Agile model, and then able to produce at a very rapid rate to meet the needs of that. Juvenile justice modification and also our financial enhancements are on our horizon. Very much needed and necessary programs. We were able to look at our current models and augment in DTMB as well as our vendor and our state staff in order to incorporate these. These are very large change controls and modifications. They are considered 2 separate programs coming into MiSACWIS that are currently working on an ancillary system. Next. Next slide. This is probably the most business slide that I could ever and implore to anyone listening on the phone that has ever managed or directed in child welfare as it relates to systems. This manifesto, as you will, or the cultural shift of an Agile, which you will hear later on in the discussion, it really resonates with the field. It is individuals and interactions over a process, and that's very much part of the mantra and what it resonates with the field. Customer collaboration over contract negotiation. Oftentimes within a SACWIS, you can see, contract negotiations and basically widget management takes over the customer collaboration of seeing what truly is the need. And lastly, probably the most, I guess, as far as the business, the most important is responding to change over following a plan. And through a waterfall implementation, it is schedule, schedule, schedule. And there is a development phase in which our IT and our PMO have to manage our vendor within the scope of the contract. That was well done. It was well executed in Michigan. But as it relates to the field and what we need in a SACWIS, we had to really respond and work together in a governance to say we need to respond to what we need in the context of Agile and still be able to execute the plan. And very much, over and over again, this is a lot of trust within the governance, a lot of people nodding their heads at executive level, tactical, operational, and day-to-day in the project. So at this time, I'll take it over to Cole next.
Hello, everybody. This is Cole Jacobson. I'm Senior Project Manager. I'm going to go through the PMO responsibilities and kind of focus on the PMO/project management aspect of MiSACWIS and our transition from Waterfall approach to a Agile philosophy. The slide that we have right now that we're on, we're going to talk about three areas. Going to be governance. We're going to talk about work approval process, and we're going to talk about a little bit of communication. Those three themes are fairly consistent through any project, if you will. Our governance structure that we set up, we held true to it for the whole 3.5 years. It was hard and to keep it in place and keep it going all the time because everybody, had their jobs to do, but we kept our governance in place. Our governance consisted of 3 levels. The first level and the lowest level is what we call our operational level. That's where the project people pretty much communicate, operate at. The next level up is called our tactical, which is more the program level. That's where we engage, for instance, Mr. Yeager at that point at the tactical level. The next level up then is our executive level, where the directors from, at the time, DHS and DTMB were engaged. The frequency of our engagement on each one of those governance levels, for operational, the project level is weekly. Right now, the tactical still remains weekly at this time, and we were bi-weekly for the executive level. But right now, we are adjusting the executive level, the frequency, and it'll probably go to a bi-weekly, if not monthly. But one of the things is we held true to that governance model through our waterfall and now in our Agile environment. The next thing I want to talk about from the PMO responsibility, and right now on the PMO, we're working on the work approval system. Every project has a work approval system or should have a work approval system, and we have to balance our requests for work, and the PMO plays an important role in that part. In that, we'll get work requests. We're on a march to compliance, and we're laying out that march to compliance, for SACWIS compliance here in the future. So that is basically draws our roadmap for us. But we also have to balance that with field considerations, the information we get from the field. Lori had mentioned a little bit earlier about efforts of going out in the field, collecting the information, getting feedback, and responding to that. So we got to balance our march to compliance, field considerations, and of course we have to also work into that our legislative changes and requests. So we've developed a gatekeeper role, so we don't have all these side doors or whatever coming into our workflow. We have one funnel, and we use the governance model to regulate that also. So that's played a significant role and helped us be successful in applying our Agile philosophy, because we have a funnel which really supports where we're going with this. The other areas, communications, obviously the project management office plays an important role in communicating where we are in the project and so forth. Our criteria have changed. How we report, for instance, how we report to Mr. Hogan, Mr. Gager, where we are in the project. The criteria and metrics that we use for Waterfall is not the same that we use now that we transition to Agile. So there is a learning process and using different types of metrics. The old metrics that we use don't work as well in an Agile environment. We can talk a little bit about the detail on that, but you do have to set the expectation that how we measure ourselves is going to change. One of the things I want to talk about just briefly is we're not purists, meaning we have recently changed from Waterfall into an Agile environment. You will see vernaculars or vocabulary, some of those hold out, things that you'll see because, we are transitioning. We're not purists. It's not 100% flip a light switch and you switch over. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. So keep that in mind also. But what we're trying to do is get to the point where we added business value, and that's what we're really after, is improve our business value. You can go to the next slide, please. Agile principles. With respect to Agile principles, you can see there the list of the if you're familiar at all, with the Agile environment philosophy, you will see your backlog. You'll see tracking of the sprint. Those are all very artifacts are very mundane with respect to an Agile Scrum type, and we use Scrum, a type of Agile philosophy. But one of the things that I really wanted to touch on is we've kind of taken some ideas with respect to Agile and Scrum, and we've tweaked it a little bit for our own use also. You'll hear a lot of product roadmap, for instance, where we are going with our product being, if you will, being MiSACWIS, the application. But what we've been working with Lori Johnson and other folks is it's not just a product roadmap. We have to consider more on the terms of a program roadmap, because it's just not the application activities that are going on. We also have to balance other items that impact our resources and so forth. What I mean by that is just looking purely development you have to look outside of just the development and take your Agile process and apply it to the whole program, meaning we have to balance requests for information. We have to balance, we have internal, external auditors. We have all this other items that we have going on. So we have been working on what we call a program roadmap also, which balances and lays out all the different things that we have going on besides our releases to production. So one of the things that has really changed from the PMO standpoint, and we had, when we were in the Waterfall arena, and now we transitioned into an Agile arena, one of the things that has substantially changed is how we manage our vendors. Like Lori had mentioned before, one of the things about Waterfall is, keep the schedule, and it's very rigid with respect to the schedule. How we manage our vendor now is a lot different than the specific of, hey, you've signed requirements, functional design, detailed design, lays out the schedule. Yes, there are dates that we have to meet. That'll always be the situation when you work in this arena, but one of the things that we've been able to do is change the way we manage our software vendor and ask them and drive them to our product owners are basically telling the vendor, these are the attributes, these are the things that I want in the future. And it's not so folded into, a plan or a schedule. We're really working on responding to change over following a particular plan. And that really is a big shift for us. Next slide, please. One of the main factors in our transition from a waterfall organization to an Agile and following an Agile philosophy and an Agile mindset is our PMO director was very instrumental in, we have a enterprise program management office, and we have our MiSACWIS PMO. We fall under that umbrella. So what we did is when we moved to the Agile process, we also had to work within the framework that the enterprise project program management office has set up and make sure that we worked with them, created new templates, and adjusted it, because we really wanted to focus on, and I give credit to our PMO director, that we really were focusing on software that works versus comprehensive documentation. One of the things from a project manager standpoint is project management isn't the project. It's just the framework it executes in. And sometimes project managers are guilty of making project management the project. It's not. It's the framework. You got to keep that in mind. But again, we're really focused on working software over documentation, so we're trying to keep our documentation in line with what's appropriate, what works, and what has business value. One of the things that we also have to work on with respect to that is, we all know, in arena, you'll have internal auditing, external auditing. So you also have to teach the auditors, we are in an Agile environment. These are the types of artifacts that we maintain and keep up. So we're spending some energy, and Jim has also agreed to spend some energy with our internal auditors and teaching them what we're doing, because the state of Michigan has a number of Agile type projects that are going on. You can go to the next slide, please. Okay, with respect to Scrum Master, like I had said before, our Agile implementation, we use Scrum. We tweaked some items and some activities with it, but the best thing to do is make it fit for where you are and what you're working on. One of the things that you will come across quickly from a project management and PMO office is we really we utilized our existing resources. We took some of the folks and spent a lot of time on training them to make them knowledgeable and experienced with respect to being Scrum Masters and leading the various teams. One of the things you do have to do is evaluate. Not all people are wired to be Scrum Masters. So when you go through and you evaluate the resources, you train them, you have to look at and balance the type of person, and is it a good fit for them to be a Scrum Master, or is it a better fit for them to be one of the team members? And you will see that as they mature and move along. A lot of folks have looked at this as an opportunity for them to take that next level. They were a team member, and now they want to be a Scrum Master. We also established Scrum and Scrum, meaning it's kind of like we have multiple teams, and they are Scrum Masters with each team. The project is big enough that we have to get Scrum Masters together. And one of the pictures that you saw earlier, there's a bunch of folks standing outside the board. So that's the Scrum and Scrums. All the Scrum Masters are coming together in a unified look at where we are. So we do utilize a Scrum and Scrum because it is a large project. We continue to encourage using our enterprise tools, and one of the things, like we said, we're not purists, so we have tools that we use, and we use those tools to best our ability right now in moving to an Agile environment. As Jim had said, Mr. Hogan had said earlier, one of the things is using the same tools, using the same processes enterprise-wide across the state of Michigan. So we have been doing that, and we're probably looking at using adding some aspects or adding some functionality to our tools to support our Agile approach. One of the things that I'd like to talk about is we started out as a PMO, MiSACWIS PMO, which we called the Project Management Office. But you heard Lori speak earlier about juvenile justice and our financials aspect for our county child care fund. It's not really just a project anymore in the true sense of project management or how the PMI looks at it. It really is a program because we're starting to bring in other aspects into this project. So we've kind of matured from a project management office to a PMO, if you will. Next slide, please. All right, Agile Coach. This is probably one of the best things that we did as far as our transition and moving from a waterfall environment to a Agile environment, or an Agile mindset, if you will, is we have an Agile coach. And that person is dedicated to an Agile, to teaching us and keeping us honest to the Agile principles. So one of the things that our Agile coach did is she held our first retrospective, meaning when we go through in a development process, there will be a grouping of work, which we call a sprint, that we go through to get to the end game, which is the final release. And at the end of the sprint, the coach did the first retrospectives, and then the Scrum Master to be was there right there with the coach and learned how to do the retrospective. What was kind of interesting is when we did our retrospective, me being the project manager and having gone through what we through our waterfall and go through our go live, and then we transitioned to an Agile approach. Is I popped into one of the retrospectives, and it was interesting to see and go through, but there was a downside to it. As soon as the project manager showed up in the retrospective, it stifled the free talk and debate between the team members on what they could do better. And that's just human nature. So basically, I never went back to a retrospective because I didn't want to stifle their exchange of ideas, because they looked at the project manager and had seen me in that role for the last 3.5 years, and so the free ideas, it kind of stifles the exchange. One of the biggest things that we worked on and the coach is helping us with is the co-location. A little side note here, one of the benefits we recognized or realized out of our RFP that we developed a long time ago when we initially started, 3.5, 4 years ago, is we wrote an RFP and to secure our software vendor, or the DDI. And when we did that, it was written as a waterfall type project. One of the things that we did do, though, is we said we will provide the state of Michigan will provide the location where the vendor will work. It wasn't an off-site location; it was all in one building. Well, that actually worked out really well for us when we transitioned to an Agile philosophy, because it has our software vendor, any other augmentation vendors. We're all in the same building. And so that carryover from our waterfall days was actually quite beneficial and helped us. And we're improving our co-location and cross-functional communications and our geography and how we set up the building. But that was very helpful, and I can't stress that particular one item enough, to be able for a developer to get up and walk down to a product owner, and a product owner saying, yes, that's exactly what I meant, or no, that's not quite how I thought. And that is such an advantage to be co-located. The last bullet I wanted on the slide there, develop phased approach in implementing Agile practices without disrupting. This was one of the hardest things for the project management office. Is the coach was able to expedite this abrupt culture change, but we as an organization still had to decide when is the right time to take the project or a new project into an Agile philosophy. The last thing you want to do, we went live in April. Okay, the last thing you want to do is take an organization and flip it on its head and flip a switch and change everything overnight, because you just cannot afford to have that dysfunction, if you will, while you learn. You have to pick your spots on where you want to say, okay, we're going to move more in an Agile philosophy in this particular area and move. You have to be careful with that, and you need to put a little bit of thought into that. When is the best time? Next slide, please. Continuing on to coach, best practices. As I had mentioned, we talked about co-location, but the other area I had mentioned vernaculars and some hangover, if you will, from the standpoint of going from a waterfall to an Agile approach. Functional testing. We still do our testing, functional testing. We're also trying to push, and Dwayne's going to talk about this a little bit more, our IT manager, about automated testing. But we still hold on to some items as we mature. But really, the importance on going forward is your product owner. And our product owners is plural in this case because the project is so big. We have multiple project owners. We don't have a lot. We probably have in the area of 2 to 3. It's a big application. There's a lot of functional areas. So we also have product owners in our juvenile justice area. We have product owners in the financial area for our child county fund portion of it, the financial portion. But the point is, you got to have faith, and you got to trust your product owners. We have excellent product owners, so we know that our product owners know what the, if we will, program roadmap is to get to compliance. And we have to trust that they will organize our work backlog to get there, and let them organize it. And Lloyd does a really good job of, she lays out the framework. We've got to get from point A to point B, and let the product owners figure out, which releases to put information in and so forth. But we also, like I had said before, we have to balance the request for the field response back, legislative response. Also, we'll get a little bit of feedback from our tactical governance level where they will ask for certain things to be implemented. As far as the program management office / project management office, those are some of the big items that we touched on in the PMO responsibility. And what I'd like to do right now is I am going to, I have one more slide. Sorry, next slide, please. Thank you. Again, this is, I've talked about this a little bit here, not putting the organization into turmoil, making your decision, picking the right time. Timing is critical when you want to move from waterfall to Agile. For us, it was a good time when we went from go live to production support. Production support, we went live in April, and we actually started really engaging in the Agile processes about mid-July in that time frame. We were comfortable at that point. Stability was critical for us. We had pretty good stability. We started going into planning and Agile for production support. Also, a good measure that we use, or a good break point, are new projects. We talked a little bit about juvenile justice and child county fund. Those are brand new projects. Those are in the development phase. Those were very good candidates for us because the folks, again, here are co-located at our building. So those were also good candidates to continue our Agile philosophy and growth in those areas. All right, those are the areas that I wanted to touch on. I am going to transition to Mr. Kirkstra, who is our IT manager for MiSACWIS. Dwayne?
Thanks, Cole. Next slide, please. Now, basically, you've heard how the PMO and other areas have helped us, but at the point of transition, we had some specific expectations. I wanted to give you a little background. We transitioned, as Cole stated, right at the point where we switched from the project mode to operation and maintenance. At that point in time, the development staff were broken basically into two main areas. True development, or they focused on the defects and the change controls that we're working on, and then production support. On the business side, we were broken up into 8 functional areas of the system because, again, there are 8 main functional areas. So what we had to do during this transition time is we kind of wanted to slow it down. So in our expectations, we said, okay, well, we need to take this a little slower. We need to look at how we're doing these things. And we said we'll do this over 3 releases. Well, at the time when we started this, our sprint cycle was 2 sprints of 3 weeks in length, and then emergency releases or sprints as we needed weekly. And then what we said is, okay, so as we started to look at things, we started to look at what we were trying to, what our expectations are in terms of communication. So we wanted to make sure that we utilized blended teams. So we started talking about creating 8 functional teams. They consisted of development staff, business BAs, technical BAs, UAT testers, QAT testers. Now, the UAT testers are also business testers. And then what we said is okay, we have an ALM tool set that we're working with, and as Jim mentioned earlier, we're moving to the newer version of that, the RTC, but we wanted to make and kind of fill the gaps as we also made this transition. And then what we wanted to do was then create a Scrum board. Now, we talked about doing team boards and things like that, but we set up one Scrum of Scrums board. That is actually the picture that you see right there, and that has been a pivotal point of our transition. For the product backlog, as we mentioned before, in the waterfall approach, we had a backlog and we had a lot of work, and and the business was prioritizing them. And like I said, we had a lot of sprints, and we were trying to move as fast as we can. But the core function out of this, we were trying to get the ability to adjust the changing priorities as the business priorities changed as we moved along. We also wanted to take the large change controls and the large defects and break them down into small user stories so we could actually do them within each sprint cycle. Then we wanted to make sure that our Scrum Masters had the ability at the program level to remove any impediments, but also at the team level, we wanted to make sure that the team could also facilitate, the Scrum Masters could facilitate the daily Scrum meetings, and then also remove any impediments at that level. And the same is true for product owner. At the Scrum to Scrum levels, we wanted to make sure that they were able to make the program, to make the changes for the business at the program level, but then also be able to prioritize the work in the team level. Next slide, please. Now, what you notice here is that I state in my first bullet, mini waterfall. Now, as Cole said, depending on if you're a purist or not, you'll probably say, well, technically you're here. Well, ultimately, yes, we are not 100% fully Agile Scrum, but right now there's no drawbacks in efficiency. We are testing early, as the next bullet states, and that has been a huge, huge benefit for us. We're reducing rework. We're not creating new defects as we're moving along. The business prioritization of the sprints has been adding business value for them because they've been able to take the inputs from the field and quickly turn them around in each one of our sprint cycles. And we've also adjusted our sprint cycles as we moved along. So as I mentioned earlier, you notice we had 2 3-week sprints every month. Well, we're to a monthly sprint, and it's a 3-week cycle, it's a 2-week cycle for development, a week cycle for, hardening, if you will, for basically testing, making sure everything is good, and then the last week is used for the deployment of the sprint. And again, like I said here, I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. I apologize. Next slide, please. Let's jump into lessons learned. And basically here, we kind of, like I said, you notice we went from smaller sprint cycles and multiple sprint cycles and we were constantly storming, and that's really what this first team bullet says, is we were constantly storming, and we weren't getting to a sense of norm, if you will, so we weren't able to make that transition. And once we were able to co-locate the teams, we were able to storm and norm quickly because they were having gate conversations, they were having stand-up meetings. The Scrum of Scrums was allowing them to actually communicate out at the program level, so we were able to make adjustments that we needed to. And as Cole mentioned earlier, we added a coach. And, you know, that outside input helped us all because we were all in that waterfall mode, and it allowed us to become self-aware, understand what we were doing previously, how could we adjust, and it just helped us reduce some of the time that it took for us to transition to Agile. Next slide, please. Now, and this is just a continuation of lesson learned. And basically here, I mean, for us, you know, utilizing the PMO and the functional managers, we were able to utilize them for reporting, communication, keeping the, you know, all those, basically what I'm trying to say is we allowed the teams to focus on the Agile principles and communicate face-to-face and get the work done. They were able to focus on, you know, I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself, I apologize. And then again, I mentioned on the slide team co-location. We definitely noticed that having the teams in one building, having them, you know, one floor apart definitely works a lot better for us than having them in multiple buildings over different, you know, across Lansing and then in different areas. Improved communication allowed us, you know, for the requirements to be met and trusted quicker in the cycle. That's basically the, you know, the communication is key to Agile transition. Now, the business change bullet there, I think it's very important to mention that we really, as a part of this Agile transition and working with the business closely, we were able to transition to a field-driven focus that allows us to engage the field end-user community through site visits, and there's just a lot of communication that is done from the project itself, and I believe it has increased user acceptance in the system. And then the last bullet here, and the most important one, I think, is the automated regression testing. I can't emphasize this enough because, you know, our teams, we have basically, you know, coming out of the project, we were utilizing one tester for every 2 developers, basically. And with automated testing, it allows you to focus on the things that you're changing, and then the automated testing will take and actually do the heavy work of just testing all of the code that you've already got done. So I mean, it really helps us, and hopefully we'll start to see the benefit in terms of not needing as many testers. Next slide, please. Now this one I just wanted to throw in here. You know, when we started doing the transition to Agile, we had, again, the 2 floors here at PNC that we were using. We had limited space that was available for us to adjust, and I have to give our folks a lot of credit because, as you can see, when you look at these pictures, they're very different environments. The teams, you know, with the Scrum Master leading them and the product owner, they were able to, you know, utilize spaces, get together, and actually, you know, work closely as a team. And these are 3 separate teams that you're seeing, 3 functional areas. Next slide. Now, future state here, what I really want to focus on this slide is, you know, once you start the transition, you know, don't stop. Follow the Agile principles. The transition will stop only when there really is no business value or doesn't outweigh the expense and impact to the team's performance. So please keep moving it once you get started. Next slide. Key insights. Transition at a natural break in the project. Again, we did it at the end of the project portion as we move to maintenance and operations. You're going to have to make that decision of what works best for you. Training, I can't emphasize enough. We utilized, you know, a lot of training up front. We also utilized a coach. Again, you have to make the decision of what works best for you. Scrum board and visual tracking greatly improved communications for team members. again, for us, the Scrum board has been just, it's a pivotal thing for us. As soon as we got it out there, and yeah, it's just tape and some sticky notes, but ultimately it allows everybody, and even, for example, Steve Yeager, he's not here, and Jim is here. When they come over, they're able to walk in, they're able to quickly look if they've got a question about something, see where it is, without even really bothering, and they're not a bother, but, ultimately, they don't have to grab a staff member and go, okay, I need you to pull, because they can actually see it. And then, again, start moving. Once you start moving, please just keep moving. You're going to make adjustments. Like I said, we started with, 2 teams, 3-week sprints, every month, multiple emergency sprints, and we're down to 1 sprint a month. It works fantastic. We've got, like I said, great teams that, they work and get things in and just keep it moving. And then, again, maintain organizational needs and standards. That's pretty much, the reason I put this one on here again is utilize your functional managers and your EPMO folks and allow them to kind of keep the teams engaged, working in the, working together and not, be bogged down by the things that happen around them. Next slide. Future plans. Now, here, new projects in the program will be Agile. And as Lori mentioned already, and Cole, basically juvenile justice, the financial stuff in regards to County Child Care Fund, MiSACWIS Mobile are all projects within the program MiSACWIS here in the state of Michigan, and they are all Agile. And we're utilizing that pretty heavily for those. And again, the main portion of MiSACWIS is moving as quickly as it can towards Agile as well. Continuously revalidate business value of the transition for production support. Mature teams to make decisions within Agile framework, adjust communications to meet organizational needs, and expand automated testing for increased quality. And ultimately, the result is business value. Next slide. Thank you. If anybody has any questions, I'm not sure. Do I turn it over to somebody?
You can turn it over to me. I'm Joyce Rose, and I want to extend a huge thank you to all of the Michigan presenters. You have done a marvelous job presenting a lot of information, and I suspect there will be several questions. So let's open the phone lines or our chat to our webinar attendees for the Q&A session with our presenters. And while that is being done, I do have a question to start off. There was a mention made of the ALM tool set. Can you explain what that set is, please?
Yeah, IBM has a tool set called the Collaborative Lifecycle Management tool set. So it's a suite of products. It's the newest iteration of the Rational tool set. And it has 3 modules. There's a requirements management module, a change management module, and then a test management module. So these are 3 unique tool sets that we use to storyboard out the project, manage change controls, and then do our test configurations. And so it's a bundled package that we use to manage the Agile process. You don't just load it on your PC and start using it. There's some training that's companion with it. But it's a internationally recognized tool set, and corporately across the Department of Technology Management and Budget, we're using this as one of our standard tools now.
And I would just like to, on the business side, how this was of great value to the project is you have a vendor coming in and their requirements contractually bound them to the IT enterprise processes. This is paramount in governance, decision-making, and Jim Hogan's and DTMB's ability to manage the vendor. So by forcing people to use an enterprise tool like this and teaching everybody that path, that's something that normally vendors come in and bring their own tools. So we were lucky enough to have a very mature DTMB to provide that suite tool set.
Great. And then I have one last question before we turn it over to our attendees for questions. What do you use? What automated test tool do you use?
Right now we're using it's called QTP, but as Jim mentioned, we're using the application lifecycle manager Rational. So it has a testing component as well. Everything is from the requirements up front, as Lori mentioned, to the actual deployment of the code. We use the Rational tool set. And we have a couple other tools that we use along with it, but ultimately we use it for the complete. Again, from the tracking of the requirements all the way to the delivery. And QTP is another testing piece that we use for the automated testing. And I can get you the actual acronyms and stuff if you would like them, and the true names for them. Again, I use ALM because Application Lifestyle Manager kind of, I forget. So I do apologize for that.
That's quite all right. Elizabeth, you want to handle the Q&A, please?
Sure. Gabrielle, could you remind our audience how they can line up on the phone for questions?
Yes, of course. To ask a question over the phone, you can press *1 to place your line into queue, and you'll be prompted to record your name so I may announce your question. Again, that is *1, and those questions do take a moment to queue up. Please stand by.
Okay, so while we're letting our audience push *1 and line up for questions, we do have a few that have come in via the chat. You're welcome to do that as well. You have usually it defaults to being on the right-hand side of your screen, a GoToWebinar chat feature, and you can enter a question there as well, and then I'll give that to our panelists. So present questions either via the phone by pressing *1, or go ahead and put them into the GoToWebinar question box. The first one that I have is actually more of a request than a question, which is, would you mind sharing the PMO templates and the procedures that you've developed?
If you go out to our state website, www.michigan.gov, and then /suite, SUITE, you should be able to find most of what you're looking for there. And if you still can't find it, give us a shout. Wayne Kirchner or Coach Jacobson, whose contact information is in the presentation. Okay,
perfect. Thank you. And again, that was www.michigan.gov/suite, SUITE.
Correct.
Fantastic. Second question we have come in. Have you made adjustments to your contracts to reflect the Agile methodology? And I'll add on to that. If you have, can you tell us a little bit about them?
This is Cole. I can start, and I actually work very close with Jim Hogan on it. We have a base contract that we have in place for our DDI, our software vendor, and as we manage our software vendor. But as I had said in the presentation, the way we manage and our statements of work as we add work onto that contract has changed. Before it was we did the RFP, you had a set requirement, set date, set deliverables, set cost, and here's probably the biggest take-home thing that has been nice the last few months is there's no more debate about whether it doesn't meet the requirement. Oh, yes, it meets the requirement. Oh, what degree of compliance does it meet the requirement? The question is now, is business, does it work for you? That's really the question now. And because we changed our contract, our statement of work on how we procure our software vendor, it's more like we don't have that debate anymore. As we go up to go live and getting ready, we spent a lot of energy, and both of us looked across the table, and Jim kind of pointed this out. He said, there's got to be a better way to do this. We're spending too much time debating, back and forth on which happens with a fixed fee, fixed price contract and so forth. We spent a lot of time and energy on that. That could have been directed towards getting the customer, meaning Lori and her team and DHS, the product that works, which goes to that one of the manifesto items as, working software over documentation, working with people, rather than negotiating, on a contract. So we don't spend a lot of time on that anymore. Now it's a question of, conversations are like, well, no, that's not quite how I expected it to work. The question now is, do we have enough time between then and the end of the release to make the changes or not? Or do we put it in the next release? It's not a matter of, 6 months ago you said this. We don't have those conversations anymore. Hope that helps.
Okay. Gabrielle, do we have any questions on the phone?
You have one question from the phone lines. One moment, please.
Thank you.
I believe this question is going to come from Dale Irish. Your line is now open.
Thank you. I was just simply trying to understand, you made mention about how you dealing with the issue of sudden things that come up. And I was not sure I really understood how you're dealing with that with your Agile environment. Some of the examples that we have are data fixes that have to be done right away. Like you mentioned, legislative changes, but sometimes these things have to be done on that day or the day after. So my question is, how do you build that into your Agile environment?
Hi, this is Lori. This is as a business, oftentimes either with policies are changing or statute driven by by federal policy or whatever. We do have a stream for that. The Agile process actually does have exactly that. Your data fixes are managed within your Agile process. Your new incoming are regulated that way. It's not a surprise. It's incredibly organized from the business side. We drive that through the project governance. If Steve Yeager was here, he would emphasize the fact of how important that relationship is at an executive level to make sure that internal kind of funneling goes directly to that operational layer. That operational layer dedicates that work immediately. So technically, this is executed in a very kind of in the release cycle, and we can talk a little bit about that because we've actually seen a significant amount of quality within the, we started out with, let's say, 50 fixes in our first month, and now we've grown to a significant amount more. So I'll turn this over to our IT manager, Dwayne Kirkstra.
So, I guess let me do it this way. So all of the data fixes, all data changes, any database changes, and code changes are all related to a release. So at the beginning of the release, they have I'll call it a period of time where they actually scope the release, and they agree on what's going to happen. You're absolutely correct. Data fixes have to be done, daily in some cases. So what we do with those is you have I'll say the development team for Team 1, we'll say. Because again, we've got 8 functional areas. They've scoped their release, and what they do is they plan for a team member who focuses on data fixes for that day, because they focus on what I like to call the team business. So every week, they're focused on here's what we're working on this week to meet, and they've got a 2-week development cycle window that they're developing to every day. And of course, with the Agile process and using that Scrum board every day, they know exactly where those specific things are in the process. So if a data fix becomes a huge issue, and our little board, you can't see it, but there's a little star they put on it, on the little sticky, and then they know that the priority's been raised, it's been a change, and then they work that, and they have a discussion with, again, the product owner, because they do have to make some adjustments. What are they going to do first that day? They have to make those kind of adjustments, and they're made pretty quickly. Does that answer your question clear? Is that clear enough, or was I missing where you were going with it?
No, it was a very good answer. Thank you.
Okay.
Gabrielle,
We have more.
Oh, I'm sorry. Gabrielle, do we have other questions on the phone?
Nope, I'm showing no further questions from the phone lines.
Okay, again, is it *1?
*1 and record your name.
Okay, perfect. We do have several questions that have come in online. Can you elaborate more on identifying product owners?
This is Cole. I'll start with it, and then I'll probably hand off to Lori, because our product owners are business managers. The product owner, in our case, our product owner are DHS staff members. Okay, they know the business. They know child welfare. They know juvenile justice. They know the business inside and out. What happened before is we had pulled our product owners, our business owners, the people that know the business, that know the program, we had pulled them down, if you will, into the weeds of detail on basically a waterfall situation. Our product owners now describe what they need done by what time frame at a higher level. They said, we got to get from point A to point B. I need to be able to do an intake, so many steps. They describe how they want it done. They don't go down to the level we're trying to get away from, have them focus on the business portion and not have them pull them down into the technical part. But mind you, our product owners, which are Lori staff, have a very good understanding of IT. We have this excellent bridge between information technology, how computers work, and the use of computers, and the business. I mean, we are very strong there. I'll hand it to Lori to talk with CEOs a little bit.
Well, one of the key considerations in when setting up a team of this complexity is the handshake between DTMB and the business folks that are going to be in this hall until implementation, and then identifying how you're going to support and maintain this system in the short term and then long term. And very much this is a built trust, and those folks that are identified on the DHS side are the drivers and are the product owners, but have been developed over that course of Water and Agile. They do take an ownership, and they have learned the system, and they are kind of your key business experts in that area. And then they have one foot in the field as well. So they are translators on a large level, and then the IT scrum comes in and is able to kind of work that team. So it's very much a kind of an evolving role that we have had high success in, is building your business folks into more IT. And the Agile process brings the IT more into the communication role. If you ask an IT developer what's the scariest thing, it's looking at somebody and talking to them about their business. That's not, we're used to developing kind of in cubicles and kind of off and not in front of the customer. This is very much a comfort level with social workers or interaction in that, those group forums are very much kind of in our wheelhouse. So there's very much a complement that goes on within the Agile session. But it doesn't happen immediately, and it happens with a lot, and it's evolved over the waterfall process. And I think it's an excellent question, and because it does recognize the inordinate amount of trust and relationship that goes on in those Agile meetings.
Thank you. Our next question up is a two-part question. First, was there any Michigan legislation that was needed to change to allow for Agile practices to be implemented?
Jim Hogan, no.
Okay. And then the second part is also a two-part question. Also, what was the largest resistance you experienced in implementing Agile, and how did you resolve it? I love that question.
Okay, so this is an excellent question. From the business side, this is very much a territory thing. If ACF was to look at us and put us on the map 4 years ago, we had to align DTMB and our business side very much as a state resource in order to manage the vendor, right? The vendor was, the person coming on point. So in order to kind of guide us, very much the project management was on this, but this is a territorial thing. There's at the end of the Waterfall, then there are a lot of folks that are, in that unraveling stage. We were able to maintain governance, and this was with a strong project management, office, if you will, up front. And so we kind of set the stage through the governance transition, but there was also minor transition within the governance. But a lot of this had to do with, and I'm going to turn this over to Cole. It was about territory. It was about rawness and about not finger pointing, and getting at the end of the day that you would come back and you would say, well, why didn't you do that? And the back and forth and so forth. That is all, if you move culturally, folks, and using that Agile coach, using a third party coming in, it could be, is ultimately, because everybody has had their leadership roles, they've evolved, they have ownership, they have commitment, and then it's launched, and then you're asking us to do what? You're asking us to trust each other and act in an entirely different role on the project. So I think that the hardest thing for us was to shift that culture and to gain trust and use I think that third-party coach assisted even our management, including myself, to kind of broker that territory. So, Jim?
The only thing I was going to add was there was a little resistance on our procurement office part. Normally when we write a contract, it's 60 deliverable days, but when we're using the Agile approach, you don't really know what the deliverables are going to be until you get to a sprint. And so we had to convince them, hey, let us get through these sprints, and then we'll have the product and what we're expecting to have delivered at the end of the sprint. So, again, a little shift in thinking for our procurement office, but they came around.
There's also, from a business sense, if you have your governance saying, when are you going to get this out? When is this going to be stabilized? What are you going to do, Lori? What's the quality of what's coming out? And on our IT side, they're getting the same thing. Why aren't you being more productive? Why aren't you getting this out? And so there is a lot of pressure internally with that governance as well. And we had to have that trust and that layer of trust between the operations and the tactical layer to ask permission to go to Agile. And with folks in leadership that are offering, very much, Mr. Hogan and Mr. Yeager were a part of this transition, we have to solution and we have to get better. And it took a lot of guts in this political environment to have that executive buy-off at that level and to offer those solutions. So, Michigan very much, went through the same emotional struggles and within the IT versus the business and so forth, and we came out on the other side. And when we have the data and the productivity levels to show that. So, and you like people coming to work just like anybody else, ready to work and wanting to be part of the solution versus how many widgets can I get done today. And so that very much was also a part of the culture. So.
Yep, this is Colby. The only other thing that it's a mindset. The coach right now is basically, when I work with the coach and the PMO, is not let us backslide into the old waterfall habits. That's one of the things that they're doing. So to keep us true to our Agile principles, that's what she's spending a lot of time with PMO.
Do we have other questions on the phone, Gabrielle?
No questions from the phone lines at this time.
Okay, we have many online. So could you describe a little bit more about the Scrum Master role, please?
Sure. This is Dwayne. So I just spilled Lori's water on her desk. So sorry about that. I apologize.
Waterfall, literally.
Yeah, pretty much. So basically, for the Scrum Masters, that we utilize our functional managers, and we utilize them. Like I said, they actually go in, and as you saw the picture, they facilitate the daily stand-ups. So each team has a daily stand-up. It's a 15-minute. It follows the Scrum, methodology. It has to be 15 minutes. You come in, you basically quickly go over the things that you're working on, where you're at, what impediments you are, so that the Scrum Master can actually remove those impediments if possible. If they can at that level, then they take it to the next level, which is the Scrum of Scrums. And again, that's where the PMO here on MiSACWIS, they facilitate that meeting, and then that takes it to the program level, and then from there it then goes into the governance, so we can get it escalated and get it taken care of quickly. Is there a specific thing that you're looking for? Because that's the basic overview to give you a better sense of what they do and who they are here.
Okay, so if there's a follow-up question, please either press star 1 to queue up on the phone, or you can go ahead and add a little bit more detail to your question through the dashboard. Does that work? So our next question up is metrics. You had said that metrics changed when shifting from the Waterfall approach to the Agile approach. Can you give some examples of the Agile metrics utilized?
Yes, right now, this is Cole. Right now, we've been using metrics as far as building our backlog, which isn't a metric. It's basically what we've done is we have a listing we have records that hold all of the work to be done. So we maintain our backlog, and as I said, it's not specifically a metric. When we get to the metrics that we have been using, we're trying to move towards and have been using like our burn down charts and our burn up charts, because we spent, when we were back in the Waterfall, what we were doing as far as schedule goes, we would say, okay, how many, and we were spending a lot of time updating schedules, okay? Line by line schedules. Like, for instance, it takes 20 hours to get this piece of work done. Okay, well, the developer comes in and says, yeah, I'm 10 hours into it, and I have remaining work of, another 30 hours. So that puts me past my estimated amount of time. We spent a lot of time doing that type of tracking and metric and so forth. And what we found out was we're spending a lot of time on these nits and measuring them. And when you pick up your head and you look at the big picture, we knew where we were. We had an idea where we were. There was very few things that jumped out. So when I go to the metrics, what I'm talking about is we are now using how many stories did we get, in this sprint? Okay, how many are we through? Does it look like, in fact, today we were looking at various charts saying, okay, this is how many stories or tasks associated with that story that we need to get through to finish by the end date of the sprint, and in this case, the release. So we measure them. You have to pick, and one of the things you have to do is you have to pick a common denominator across all the programs or all the sub-projects, whether it's juvenile justice, whether it's MiSACWIS application proper, or whether it's incorporating the child county care fund. And you have to, and we're not perfect. We're working through this. We're trying to pick a denominator that works, be it tasks, be it number of stories done, but we're trying to get away from your questions with the Scrum Master will be, what do you have on your plate today? What did you do yesterday? And those are the items that we're measuring, as opposed to 2 years ago, how many hours did it take you to do this? How many more hours you got left? We don't do that quite as much anymore. We're kind of pulled back, and we are, again, like Lori was saying, we're trusting the team to say, you said you have this many items that are going to be in the release. How you get from point A to point B is basically self-organizing your team to get there, as long as the product owner you meet the acceptance criteria that the product owner set forth when they said, you should be able to do X and Y to get to Z. How you get there, you guys figure it out. We're not going to go down, into the weeds. So we've been working with burn down charts. We don't right now, as far as velocity. If you're really mature in an Agile process, specifically Scrum, you'll have velocity rates. And we started in July, and I think if I went to Dwayne and said we're going to start measuring velocity at this point in time, I don't think Dwayne would. We'd probably look at each other and go, are we ready to do that yet? Are we mature enough to do that yet? I don't think we will be, but I don't think we're there yet. So right now we're counting widgets, but those widgets are not hours. And how many hours does it take to get X, Y, Z done? So that's what we're using for metrics right now. The other challenge is you still get questions from folks who are not Agile, and in the Agile area, they'll ask you waterfall questions. For instance, we used to measure, oh boy, when we were going to march to a go live, we were measuring test scenarios, right? Test scenarios. We were measuring the number of critical defects we had. We were measuring, those are, test scenarios, defects. What other things? We were measuring those types of things as we marched to go live. We're not measuring those types of things anymore. We keep it, again, I'll go back to the purist. I mean, if you went to, we've gone to outside training, and the philosophy is you don't have defects. Well, we're not purists. We still recognize that when we collect items from the field and we still call them defects, the purists would say, hey, when the release goes out, there's no defects. This way is clean. We haven't totally accepted that philosophy. We still keep, our defects. Because a lot of times we'll get questions from folks who are not in, the Agile environment, and they'll, for instance, the things that we measured previously, we've kept a few of those around so we can at least compare before and after, because we do get questions, and they don't want to be honest, the executives and legislature, they don't want to hear about, our change in process. They want to see productivity, how you get there, satisfaction in the field. That's what they really want to care about, what they really want to hear about. So I hope that answers.
Okay. And we did hear back from the original person who had asked about the Scrum Master role to say that you did give a very thorough answer to the question, so there was no follow-up to that. We are right at time, and we do have some additional questions. And so what I'd like to do is turn it back over to Joyce at this point, because, Joyce, I know one of the things that you talk about is what to do if you have questions after the webinar. So what I would like to suggest is I'll go ahead and forward the questions that I've received online to you and invite our audience to follow the instructions that you're about to give to submit any other questions that we didn't have time to get to today. Would that work?
That'll work. Thank you very much.
Then I turn it back over to you.
So I want to extend a huge thank you to Jim and Lori and Dwayne and Cole for an excellent presentation of information. You were both open and very honest, and we all certainly appreciate that. To our attendees, we hope the information that was shared with you today was both informative and valuable. As a reminder, please remember to register for the February webinar once the announcement is released. Now, if you have any additional questions regarding today's topic, or would like more information about any of our scheduled webinars, or would like to even volunteer your state as a topic presenter, please do not hesitate to contact me at the email listed above. So what that means, if you have additional questions aside what were submitted via the chat, just send them to me at the email address, joyce@kassets.com, and I will coordinate the answers with our folks from Michigan, and we will distribute those to all of the attendees. So once again, this webinar has been recorded and will be made available online. When it is complete and posted, we will send a message via the SACWIS Manager's listserv with the link. Thank you, and have a good day.
And with that, we will conclude today's conference. Thank you for your participation.